Next up, let's talk about custom validators. So sometimes the built-in validators are simply not enough, and in that case, we can also build our own custom validators. And a validator is actually really just a simple function which should return either true or false. And if it returns false, then it means there is an error. And on the other hand, when we return true, then the validation is correct and the input can be accepted. Okay, so let's now build a simple custom validator here. And what I want to validate is if the price discount is actually lower than the price itself. Okay, so that's something that we cannot do using the built-in validators, and so we're simply gonna build our own. All right, so we need to now specify here an object for the schema type options. All right. So the type is number, and then to specify our validator, we use the validate property. Okay, so validate, and then, as I said, a simple callback function. Okay, and again, not an arrow function, but a real function, because in this function, we're gonna have access to the this variable, which will point to the current document. Okay, now if you didn't need the this variable, then you could of course just use an arrow function. Okay, so we have a callback function, and that callback function actually has access to the value that was inputted. So in this case, the price discount that the user specified. So that's what I call the value, so val for short. And so remember that we need to return either true or false from this validator. Okay, so when do we want to return false and when do we want to return true? Well, we want an error when the price discount is greater or equal than the price. Okay, and so basically what we want to return here is the test of testing if the value is less than this dot price. All right, so let's say that the price discount is 100 and that the real price is 200. So 100 is less than 200, true, and so we have no error. And that makes sense because that's exactly what we want. The price discount should always be lower. On the other hand, if the discount is 250, then this turns out to be false. And then false, remember, will trigger a validation error. All right, so let's now test that out actually. So price and price discount. And let's use the values that we used before. And I also need to change the name here. Okay, so right now our discount is greater than the price. And so we should get our error. Okay, and indeed, we have a validation error. So failed for path price discount. Now we do not have any custom message here. And so let's quickly fix that. All right, and the way we do that is in a very similar way as we did with the enum. Okay, so we need to actually specify another object and then set the message property. Okay, so validate should be an object, and then we have our message in there, and this function here will live in a property called validator. Okay, and our message here will be discount price should be below the regular price. All right, here we need a comma, and so now we're good. And actually one very nice trick is that this message here also has access to the value. And this works in kind of a weird way, and this really is internal to Mongoose. So this has nothing to do with JavaScript. So I can simply use the curly braces here and then value. Okay, so this piece here will get access to the value that was inputted. So it has the exact same value as this val variable. All right. So let's test that again. And now indeed we get our message and even access to the 250 price that we specified here. Now let's change it to 100, and so now it should work. And yeah, it does. So, great. Now there is one very important caveat that we need to notice here. And that is that inside a validator function, the this keyword is only going to point to the current document when we are creating a new document. Okay? So this function here is not going to work on update. Okay? And so that's very important to note. So you see that in Mongoose there are a couple of caveats that you really need to be aware of when working with it. Okay? And I learned all of these by experience, and so that's why now I'm able to tell them to you. So I ran into an error once with this one, and so from that time on, I know that I can only use this kind of validator with a this keyword in there when I'm actually creating new documents. So let me write that down here for you. All right. So I hope that you're kind of taking note of all of these very important small pieces of information that are very important. Okay, the same thing down here. Remember that where I told you that this document middleware only really runs for save and create, but not for update. Okay, and that's one of these other things that are really important to never forget. Okay. Now in this specific case here, there are actually ways around fixing this, but they're very complicated and not really worth pursuing, all right? And we could of course also write validator functions that do not rely on a this variable. So in this case, we only need it because we're comparing one value with the value of another field. All right. Anyway, this is a custom validator that we can use in Mongoose and that we did actually write ourselves. But also, there are a couple of libraries on NPM for data validation that we can simply plug in here as custom validators that we do not have to write ourselves. All right, and the most popular library is called Validator. And so let's actually take a look at that one. So Validator, and then I'm searching for GitHub because usually all of these libraries are always on GitHub. And the documentation is also going to be there. And so here you see that Validator is a library of string validators and sanitizers. All right. You also see that it's quite popular with 30,000 starts. And so yeah, that's very good. All right. So we also see this library validates and sanitizes only strings. All right. So here is then all of the stuff, how we install it and how we use it. But that's kind of simple, we already know that. Well, what I want to show you is the list of all the available validators. So for example, we have isAlpha, which is going to check if the string contains only letters. We have alphanumeric, so only letters and numbers. And we really have a lot of stuff here. So check if a string is Boolean, or check if the string is a credit card, so a valid credit card number, or if it's a currency, or you see really all kinds of different tests. For example, an ISBN, so for checking book numbers, to test if it's an integer or if the string is lowercase. And so you see, whenever you need some data validation, you can grab one of these libraries and simply plug them into your Mongoose validators. Okay? Now, many of the things that are here are actually already built into Mongoose, and so we don't need all of them. Okay? But there is one very specific, which I want to use, which is isAlpha. So I want to check if the tour name only contains letters. All right? And so for that, I can use this function from the validator library. So let's go back and start by installing npm I validator. All right. So that was successful. Then I need to import it here. And so now we're good to go to actually use it here. So I'm going to use it here. And again, I use the validate property. And now all I need to do is to really plug in the function here. Okay, and in validator, it works like this, where validator is an object, and on there we have then all these methods. So validator is alpha. So that's the one that we just choose from the documentation. All right, and that's actually it. So we don't call it here. We basically just specify that this is a function that should be used. All right, so just like our own one, like our own validator, we didn't call it. We simply put this callback function here that is going to be called as soon as the data should be validated. All right, and so here it's the same. Now, if we want to specify an error message, it works just like up here. So we can specify an array and then the error message after the callback function. And we could have done that down here. So here we did it differently. Here we then created this new object with validator in there and then message. But we could have done it with an array as well, but that would have looked weird, right? But up here, since the function is so small, so this is so small, we can simply put it here and then as a second argument in the array, add the error message. So tour name must only contain characters. Great, check that out. Back in Postman here, let's get rid of our price discount. And let's add some number here. And so that should then fail the test. And indeed, the name must only contain characters. So let's get rid of that. We can also not use this name. We already used it before. So let's simply write out 2 here with characters. And we still get this error here. And well, that's probably because of the spaces. So let's just get rid of the spaces, which of course is not going to be real useful. And indeed, now it works. So the problem was the spaces, but obviously we want to keep the spaces here. All right. And so in fact, this validation here is not really useful. And so I will get rid of it. Okay. So consider that this here was only to demonstrate that we can use an external library like this to perform validation. And actually, we will still use this library a bit later when we check if the user email is actually valid. So that's another nice function that is included in this library. All right. So again, this is how it works. Not really useful in this case. So if we really wanted to test if the string only contains letters and spaces, it would probably be simpler to simply use a regular expression to test for that kind of pattern. All right. But I'm not going to do that here because this lecture was more about these custom validators. Anyway, with this lecture, we are now ready with the introduction to Mongoose. All right? Now, as you can imagine, there is of course still a lot to learn about Mongoose. And in fact, we have an advanced Mongoose section a bit later in the course. And of course, also in the other sections, you will keep learning more and more about how to use Mongoose in a real professional way. But anyway, you have already learned so much up until this point. So huge congratulations for making it this far. And it's great to see that you're still with me here. So great job, and I hope to see you soon.